Okay, great. So everyone should have set up their interpretation, and we also ask you, because we are going to be in breakout groups in the future, to put a 1 in front of your name if you would prefer to be in an English-speaking breakout room, or a 2 in front of your name if you would prefer to be in a Spanish-speaking breakout room. So let me just turn off this music. We ask folks that just throughout to limit distractions, and then please use the raise hand function. We have several places that we welcome you all to participate and share your experiences and your knowledge. We are really excited to be in community with all of you, and we want this to be an interactive space and a learning space. I saw someone put that in the chat that they love learning, and so we know that there's no one experience. So we are going to bring, our experiences, but we definitely want to hear from you. And now I am going to kick it off to Kezia.
Thank you so much. So I'm Kezia Scales. I'm the Director of Policy Research for PHI, and I am delighted to welcome you to the third and final session in The Moment is Now, Essential Jobs, Essential Care Advocacy Skills Series. As you may know, this series is part of the Essential Jobs, Essential Care initiative that PHI is leading in partnership with the IMPART Alliance in Michigan, the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition, and the North Carolina Coalition on Aging, and advocates like all of you. Our overall goal for this initiative is to advance policy solutions for direct care workers across these and other states. We're grateful to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the John A. Hartford Foundation for making this important work possible. So this Advocacy Skills Series is designed to help us collectively build our capacity to advocate for those policy reforms that we so desperately need. 2 weeks ago, the Advocacy Institute led us through the process of convening and mobilizing a strong coalition. Then last week, we heard from the Frameworks Institute about how to effectively frame and message our direct care workforce issues. If you missed either of these sessions or would like to hear them and watch them again, I want to let you know that all 3 session recordings will be available as part of our online advocacy toolkit that we're planning to launch at the end of this initiative, which will be this fall. So keep an eye out for that. But today I'm pleased to welcome back Marissa Martin and Corey Parrish from the Advocacy Institute. They're here to talk to us in their eminently experienced and practical way about building the relationships that we need to succeed in our advocacy efforts. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Kezia. So I'm Marissa Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Advocacy Institute. Our organization supports social justice organizations to build the advocacy skills, knowledge, and power you all need to shape government policy for a more just and equitable New York, or in your case, New Mexico, North Carolina, or Michigan. And the way we do this is we deliver trainings and tools, we build networks, develop leadership, and all of this is so that we can see a government that's more accessible, transparent, and accountable to our communities. We know that policy and government in this country was not made for all of our communities in an equitable way. And so we really focus on this systems change because we see how this impacts the resources that go out, the power that is held, and can often foster equality or inequality depending on the access that you have. This is our team. We're all based in the tri-state area. And as Kezia mentioned, Corey, our deputy director, will also be taking you through some sections. And we have a membership model where we really provide kind of deep strategic support along with our trainings for organizations that are doing social justice work. So some agreements that we just want to share. As mentioned, this session is is being recorded. And so we ask that folks speak from your own experience. And while it will be out there, you know, what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. So please take these key learnings that you get, and as people share their experiences, and just, you know, don't necessarily need to attribute them to a specific individual without connecting with folks and asking them. We're all coming from different places. So again, we want to emphasize just assuming, you know, positive intent, but owning your impact as you share your own experience, that some folks here might experience things different. So last week we introduced our legislative campaign assessment and tracking tool we call our LCAT. And this really gives a campaign overview of sort of mini wins, you know, steps along the process. Again, this is non-linear, but we wanted to just focus today on relationship building. So drop in the chat or raise your hand. What words come to mind when you think of building relationships with elected officials? Thanks, Rena. Challenging, frequency, trust. Would any of you like to come off mute to share a little more? Purposeful. Awesome. Valerie, to the point. Relatability, action related. Targeted, efficient, identity. Collaboration, education, and connection. Awesome. Sharing issues in your community. Awesome. So there's a lot of words that you all shared out, right? And so there's a lot of different ways that we engage with elected officials, and a lot of different minds that come to us. I think that all of these are so encouraging and you know, on point in terms of how it seems that you're all communicating with your elected officials. So thank you so much for sharing. And so why do we need relationships, right? And so why are we spending this whole session talking about building those relationships? And that's because there are thousands of bills a year introduced in any state legislature, right? That doesn't mean that many are passed, but we see that so many are introduced at all different branches of government. And they're introduced by people, right? And they are supported by elected officials. And then elected officials are people too. Often we know that there's an issue, we want to make a change. You know, we hold rallies, we put pressure, but really taking a moment to think about how do we really build true relationships. I saw the words trust in here, collaboration, connection, right? How do we connect with these elected officials who are people? And then the policy versus the politics, right? If we want to do this work, it is extremely hard to do without building these relationships and without acknowledging the landscape that exists, that all of our elected officials are elected. They have to run again for their positions, and they are deeply, you know, engrossed in politics, right? And in sort of trying to navigate all of the different decisions that are made on different bases. So having these relationships are really key to understanding where they stand, understanding what influences them. And then also they have a limited bandwidth, right? And so while they might care, you might have folks who care about everything, you also need people to pay attention to what you care about. And if you think about yourself as an individual, what do you pay attention to? Often it's things that you care about and that people you care about also are invested in and interested in. So as you build these relationships, it can help, you know, with that messaging that you all talked about at the last session. And then the best campaigns are in partnership. So the Advocacy Institute has done a lot of work to start trying to build relationships with elected officials and co-governance, and to encourage our members to do so too, so that you can really push more change, right, in partnership with community members as well as elected officials. So today we're going to talk through an exercise called a power analysis. Who here, put a 1 in the chat if folks here have heard of a power analysis. Awesome. Awesome. So it sounds like a lot of folks have heard of this in some way. We're going to show one way of doing it, one way that we've done it, but we know that there's a lot of other ways as well. So we encourage folks to share out. So in thinking about this power analysis, what this basically is doing is it's creating a map for you of your relationships, right? And of the people that are in your network, in your campaign, and sort of assessing where they are in terms of what your priorities are, how supportive they are, you know, and how much power that they hold. And so the first and foremost thing that we encourage folks to do is assess the full landscape, right? So we just talked a lot about words that come to us when we're thinking about elected officials, but we know that campaigns aren't just won by elected officials, right? They're won by all of us. And the most moving campaigns that we can see are folks that are bringing in a lot of different people from different places. So always think about, as you're setting up, who are some coalitions you might work with, who are some faith leaders, unions, individuals, right? Celebrities. I know in New York, there's a few celebrities that have stepped in at different points for campaigns. And so think about who are those folks, and then also opposition groups. And the reason why we focus on opposition groups is because for us to be super prepared, it's always great to know what you are up against. So if you have a beautiful campaign laid out, you can't see why folks would be against it, taking a moment to think about who would be against this and why is that, right? What are their arguments? What do you predict their strategy would be, right? In the past, how have you seen them come against it? So in New York, of course, and many other places in this country, housing is a huge crisis right now, is in a huge crisis. And so whenever we're working on our campaigns, we always think about who's against us, right? The real estate industry, how do they usually move their strategies, right? What are their tactics that they usually do? What are their strengths, right? What are their challenges? How might you be able to, work against that and sort of neutralize that opposition? And so in taking some time to just think about it, it's important. And so the first step of that is really identifying those individuals or groups. So this is the power analysis tool that we really look at. It's just a simple grid. And so what we're showing is that, sort of the horizontal axis is showing the support, right? So if you're really, really supportive, you're on the right. If you're really, really against, you're on the left. And then the vertical axis shows the level of power that the individual, group, coalition, whatever it is, holds. And so these are helpful, and everyone will also get a copy of the slides. But these are helpful ways to think about how you can really address and interact with different individuals who are in each of these different grids. So if you have somebody who is holds a lot of power, right, but they're really against, you want to monitor them closely, because things, the decision-making power that they hold is important. They could make it quickly. It could really derail your campaign. And so thinking about if folks are more towards the middle, more on the fence, how can you win them over? And then folks who are on your right, those are your champions, right? The upper right, fully engage them, work with them. Those are the folks who are going to be your greatest partners. In the bottom left-hand corner, low power and against, right? These are stakeholders who might really be your opposition, but they don't really move a lot, right? You don't see them making an influence or having an influence on elected officials or decision makers. So you always want to monitor them as well, but they may not be as much of a threat. And then the low power support on the bottom right, these are folks that you want to keep in the mix, You want to make sure that you're communicating with them, work to mobilize these supporters, and also partner with them to help leverage their power, right? So these might be more junior elected officials who just got elected into office. They're huge champions, but they don't hold a lot of official authority. And so you as a community can help build them up. So this is just an example that we wanted to share of one that's happening in New York. And this is for the New York State Health Act, or we have one, it's called Campaign for New York Health. And so this is one thing, and we'll share again that you are constantly, this isn't something you do just once and let it be. It's something that you want to revisit, right? Because as we said, policy and politics work very closely. So when things change, that can shift your dynamics and shift what you're doing. And so this is our former governor, right? Andrew Cuomo, as you see, he had a lot of power and he was really against this, right? And he made that clear. And that's just how the campaign had to really operate. And then we have the UFT, which is a very powerful union, as well as a group called Realities of Single Payer, who was really against single payer health insurance. And I'm sorry, the New York Health Act is for single payer health insurance for everyone in New York, regardless of immigration status. And then we have over here, we have our majority leader of the state Senate and our assembly speaker. These folks, right, they hold a good amount of power. Again, since I'm using photos, I didn't want to bunch them all together, but they would be sort of equal, right? They hold a lot of power. They're in the middle. They want to listen to their conference. They want to understand what their members think and care about. And then over here, we have State Senator Gustavo Rivera, who is the chair of the Health Committee, right? So he holds a lot of power in terms of what's introduced into committee, how he wants to move it forward, and he's very supportive of it. And then we have Dick Gottfried, who is the assembly member, who is the sponsor. And this man has been working on this bill for probably 10 years, right? He's introduced it over and over and over. He is actually retiring this year. And so like, this is a good example of like, next year, if this doesn't pass, we'll rework this, right? Because there'll be a new health chair, right? We will have to reassess where is Gustavo Rivera. And then right here is Kathy Hochul, who's our current governor. So we see she's a little more supportive on the fence. She said publicly a lot that she thinks that there's a lot of failings of the healthcare system. So we were able to place her and move that. So this is just an example we wanted to walk through. We know it is a very New York specific example, but we encourage folks to think about what does this look like for your campaigns? And you'll see on the other side, right? There's other things we didn't place in terms of faith leaders or state coalitions, community groups that might also be placed here. And so, you know, just in closing, the power analysis helps us make a roadmap, right? It helps you prioritize your targets, think about who you really want to or have capacity to spend time building relationships with and why, right? So, and it allows you to reflect on and organize all of the info and intel you already have and surfaces what you don't know yet, right? So maybe we might see like, oh, Kathy Hochul is on the fence. Like, what do we need to move her, right? Let's look back through her statements. Let's look through her budget. Let's look through her state of the state. What did she say that we could really connect to our campaign? And this can help you develop a strategy. I would say when you also do this in coalition, it's really helpful that you can all work together and surface all of the different things that you all know, right? Because we all take in different media, different intel, we know different people. And then you can really look at your grid and be like, we're missing, you know, folks who have high power and are super supportive. Where can we find those individuals, right? Why aren't they placed here? What could we do to organize folks into that? And again, not a one-time exercise. Power map as you go. You know, in our state last year, our governor stepped down. So lots of power mapping was switched up, right? And a lot of placements were removed because targets had moved, right? And different individuals were more powerful than maybe they were before. And then always just include everyone in the landscape. If we only focus on elected officials, we can miss some really key opportunities to build relationships with their staff, with secondary targets, which is something Corey will talk more about. And so it's really important to think about this and just use this to whatever place you're at in your campaign of how it could be helpful. It could be super hyper local, right? It could be in your town, or it could be on a statewide campaign. So it's just a helpful way that we have found brings you together. Any questions about this tool? Feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. All righty. We are moving on to breakout rooms. So Corey just shared in the chat with you all a power analysis worksheet. So it really lays out sort of the previous section of slides, puts it into a document for you all to look at and sort of map out, who are the folks that in the executive, legislative leadership, agencies, community organizations, opponents, right? To really list out and say, have we really thought about this? Do we know all of these people really easily? And then, so we're gonna give you 5 minutes. We're gonna put you into the breakout rooms. And then we ask you to take 5 minutes of independent screen time where you kind of look at that, or I guess it's not screen free time since we just sent it to you on the screen, but where you just aren't discussing, you're looking at that and sort of processing for yourself and your own campaign. Then we'll send you a message that 5 minutes is up, and we ask you and invite you to all have a conversation together around what surfaced for you, right? Who do you know? Who don't you know? Was this easy to place? Is there information? And so, talk about who are the top 3 people you want to build with and why? And then who don't you have relationships with, and what are your strategies moving forward, right? Because we know you're all coming from different locations with different campaign strategies. So just think about those 2 questions. Who are the top 3 people you want to build with and why? And why don't you have relationships? Who don't you have relationships with, and what are your strategies moving forward? Any questions about what we're doing? All right. I paused for interpretation, so hopefully that went through. Flag us if you have any questions. You'll be in the rooms for 15 minutes. Welcome back, folks. It seemed like you were in deep in conversation and holding on to each second. So awesome to hear that. Would anyone like to share out? Either raise your hand or drop in the chat. What was that like for you? Right? Was it easy to identify those people?
I was in breakout room 6. I can just say, we tried. We identified some, but we couldn't even access the form, and had a few technical humps to get across, trying to remember what was on the form, and then trying to get to Google Docs without losing the breakout group. So I'll just say we didn't finish.
Got it. I'm so sorry about that. Next time we'll make sure that we have access. Was it just you weren't able to access it, or?
Well, I didn't want to, I had put it in Google Docs, and I didn't want to leave my breakout room to get to Google Docs. So I tried to do one thing on one device and this other thing on the other device. And as a senior citizen, I find these technological challenges more than my head can handle.
Absolutely. So sorry about that. Hopefully after, you know, this is definitely, we wanted to give space to be able to apply it, and like, you know, that form is for you to have so that in the future, I can say I much more prefer doing this exercise in person with people. And so
Right.
maybe perhaps in your state, when you all, if you all get together, you can revisit it. So
Well, the
sorry.
gist of it was we have homework to do.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So,
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Other folks? Feel free to drop it in the chat. How was that for folks?
This is Debbie. I believe I was in Breakout 8. I think at least we weren't exactly sure what we were doing. I should have asked before we left, but we just talked a lot about what we are all doing in our prospective states currently. And we had an attorney in there, so I think I gained a lot of knowledge from her and what they do. So I think it was very valuable though.
Great. Great. Yeah. I mean, we definitely wanted to also have that space for you all to connect. And Terry, absolutely, you know, I think all across the country, states are feeling and campaigns are feeling the same struggles. Any other feedback or reflections? Okay, well, once again, we apologies for any technical issues. And again, this is a tool that you have to take with you and revisit, you know, repeatedly with different folks in, you know, whatever capacities you're able to meet up together. So we encourage you to continue to look at it. And, you know, you can feel free to reach out if you do have those questions. All right, I'm gonna, oh, thanks for these reflections in the chat. Agree, working on multiple states is very, very difficult. We will, and Debbie, we'll email out all of the links that we've been sharing in an email afterwards as well. And now I'm gonna pass it over to Corey to talk through building relationships.
Awesome, thanks, Marissa. So, okay, after your coalition has conducted its power analysis, you have lots of ideas of who you want to build relationships with. So one question that can come up is, how do you reach these folks? So some of y'all are probably familiar with the term target, which has a really specific meaning in the advocacy and community organizing world. Put an exclamation point in the chat if you and your coalition use this word, and put a question mark in the chat if you've heard it, but you're not exactly sure what it refers to.
What word was that again?
Target. Yeah, so it looks like definitely some folks are using it. There's other folks are not quite sure. So for folks who aren't using the term, we introduce it, even though it can sound a little intense, because it can give your group a shared understanding of why you're focusing on specific folks in your strategy. So your primary target is the person who can give you what you want. For example, the governor can sign your bill into law or include your budget item in the final budget. These are the folks that are in the public eye. And you always want to identify your target, your primary target, as a person as opposed to a group. The reason is that it makes your strategy smarter. So for example, let's say you know that your bill is going to be considered by the health committee in your state senate. So instead of just saying, oh, our target is the health committee, it's more helpful to do a power analysis and map the members of that committee So you can identify who already agrees with you, who's never going to agree with you, so don't bother, and who are the mushy middle that you need to convince. And so now you're building relationships with actual people as opposed to this sort of nebulous group with lots of different perspectives. So what if you know you need to sway the chair of the health committee and another longtime member of that committee, but you don't already have an in with them? That's where a secondary target comes in handy. So these are the people that you have more access to, and they have more access to your primary target. So these folks might be behind the scenes. They might be, for example, the staff of an elected official or a nonprofit colleague who has a friendship with your target. There are lots of different folks who your primary target may listen to, but focus on the ones that your organization or coalition has enough power to move and build relationships with them. So what are some examples of secondary targets? It could be other elected officials you already have relationships with. It could be staff or former staff, family members, people in their faith community, other local community leaders. And it can be really helpful to do your power analysis multiple times with different groups of people involved in your campaign, because they may have different relationships that you didn't know about. For example, you might learn that a board member goes to the same faith institution as your target. So get creative when you're thinking about folks that your target listens to. So for example, when we got a new governor last year, after our last governor was outed as a sexual harasser, the Fair Pay for Home Care Workers campaign had a new target that they weren't as familiar with because they hadn't worked with our new governor as much. Our new governor is from Buffalo, and so they leveraged their existing relationships in Western New York, including with a state senator from that area, and also their contacts in the Office of Aging in Erie and Niagara counties. They also use that opportunity to build stronger relationships with community-based organizations in the region, including other AI members. Staff can be really, sorry, go back one. Thank you. So staff can especially be a good pick for secondary targets because of their close relationship with your target. They often have more time to talk with you and learn about your issue. And they often end up running for office or moving to other roles later. So it can be helpful in the long run to continue to build with them. So remembering to treat them with respect and get their contact info can be really helpful. So what are some ways that y'all have built relationships with primary and secondary targets? Feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. What have you found to be helpful in building relationships with primary and secondary targets? Yeah, send them info about what we're up to, even if it's not issue related, right? So you're building a relationship with them over time. What else? We encourage staff to connect with their local legislator, find points of connection. Yeah, that's great. And sending thank you notes. Yes, that can be super helpful. Video chats, email, calls, letting them know the important issues and asking for their support. And getting out there and meeting them, sending them information about your events and meetings. Yeah, all of these are really great ways to build relationships. Telling personal stories, meeting them and introducing yourself at the yearly Senior Community Day. Yeah, so you can invite them to your events and also find them at events that they'll also be attending. Getting introductions from a third target to have the meeting. Yeah, so we can daisy chain back to the person that we're really trying to build with. Identifying common values, yeah, that's really important. Yeah, so the next slide has a sort of a summary of all of the good ideas that you all mentioned. And so we'll talk a little bit about some strategies in relationship building. And as Marissa mentioned earlier, it can be really helpful to figure out what your target already cares about to connect them with what you care about. So how do you all figure out what elected officials care about? Drop it in the chat or come off mute. Yeah, what they campaigned on, those are important ones, right? Because those are going to be their big priorities. Asking them, listening to questions and comments during committee meetings. Our CILs hold an annual legislative day at the Capitol. Stephen, what's a CIL? Following them on social media, that's great. Finding out what bills they've co-sponsored, looking at their voting record. Yeah, these are all great ideas. Yeah, it's stalking their page, looking at their social media. CIL is the Center for Independent Living. Thank you. Which caucuses they are part of. Yeah, and staying up to date on the news. Definitely. Yeah, so these are basically all of the ideas that you all shared, plus you added some other ones. Their official websites, things they've sponsored, media appearances, committees, caucuses, social media. So once you have a sense of what they care about, then you'll be tailoring your messages to them based on that information, right? So some of y'all went to the messaging training last week, and I'm sure you learned some great stuff relevant to what we're talking about here. Someone already mentioned that leading with shared values can be really helpful, especially if you're not fully aligned with the target, but you can find the places where you all definitely agree. Being really clear about what your problem is and what impact it. Yes, we will provide the slides. Sorry, I just got distracted in the middle of a sentence. So being able to be really clear about what the problem is and what impact it has can be really helpful. So when the coalition was working on the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights in New York, they did a participatory action research project where nannies and home care workers who were leaders in the campaign surveyed other nannies and home care workers and made this shiny report on how bad working conditions were. It was a really great way to build their base and agitate folks to get involved in the campaign. And it also gave legislators something concrete and fancy looking that they could take to a press conference and say, we're doing something about this. Letting your targets know how pressing your problem is and why we can't wait to solve it is really helpful. And being really clear about your solution. It can be really helpful to give local context where you have it. And we're going to drop into the chat a video that was made last year by the New York Caring Majority, which is the coalition that's working on fair pay for home care workers. It's really great in terms of demonstrating the various points above. And remember not to hoard relationships, right? Your campaign will be more powerful over time if there's a broad group of people, especially directly impacted people who are holding a variety of the relationships you need to win. And lastly, be responsive to your target's questions and concerns. Make sure that they really understand your issue. Last year, the Fair Pay for Home Care Workers campaign struggled because the staff of the Senate Majority Leader didn't fully understand their budget ask and had some misinformation, which was part of why it didn't pass last year. But it's going to pass this year. We're so close. So then this is a New York timeline again. And the reason that we're sharing it is as a reminder to get to know the timeline in your state and the patterns of the legislature. So for example, are they more available to meet on certain days? What are they doing during the summer? When are they attending events? How do elections impact their behavior and availability? And really what we want to do is to have a year-round strategy. So the same way you're annoyed at the friend who only comes around when they want something, invest in your relationships with your targets as people. You can include them in your newsletter, wish them happy birthday, ask for coffee during off times, go to events where you'll run into them, basically all the stuff that you wish that friend who only comes around when they need something would do, and all the stuff that you all mentioned when you were talking about your strategies for building relationships. Oh, and did I mention staff? Staff are people too. And if you do have a C4, elections are a great time to build relationships. The work that you and your members do to help someone you believe in get elected pays off when it's time to ask them to follow through on their campaign promises. Any questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. All right, I will turn it back over to Marissa to talk about legislative meetings.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. And I want to lift up the comment from Rena just about knowing when they're in district office versus, at the Capitol or the legislature. Those are always so key. So thanks for lifting that up. All right. So we're going to talk about legislative meetings. Drop an exclamation point in the chat if you have participated in a legislative meeting. Awesome. See them rolling in. Great. So seeing all of these names, we're going to watch an example for any folks who haven't. And then we're going to debrief after that meeting, and we're going to look at what can we learn from that meeting, go through some pluses and deltas. So right now, let me just share this.
CJ, we'd like to tell you the story of Pluie.
Who's Pluie?
I'm glad you asked.
That's Pluie.
Yes.
Pluie's a wolf,
Yeah, she is.
and you're going to tell me her story?
Sure. For 4 years, scientists have tracked Pluie as she made her way from Banff National Park in Alberta up and down the Rockies. In that time, she's made 3 round trips between Canada and Wyoming, covering 40,000 square miles. We think you'll admit it was a pretty impressive performance for Pluie, especially when you consider the impediments of modern life she had to conquer. Highways, housing, forests denuded of trees.
Not to mention the U.S.-Canadian border.
Sure, because no photo ID.
I'm sorry?
That was a joke.
Why does Pluie make the trek? Because wolves have to breed with many packs in order to keep from becoming extinct.
Really?
If they breed among themselves, they'll eventually produce offspring that's genetically weaker, thus endangering their long-term survival.
That helps explain Buckingham Palace.
May we tell you what we propose?
Sure.
The wolves-only roadway.
The wolves-only roadway?
1,800 miles from Yellowstone to the Yukon Territory, complete with highway overpasses and no cattle grazing.
An 1,800-mile wolves-only roadway?
Pluie, you'll recall, had to
Hang on. How are you going to teach wolves to follow road signs?
Our scientists are working on a plan.
Yeah, but in the meantime, Pluie's going to get drunk and wander off the wolves-only road and end up eating my cat.
We don't think that'll happen.
I don't think this is going to happen.
Perhaps we should...
First of all, ranchers don't want wolves returned to the West.
Ranchers are killers.
No, they're not, and anyone who says it should take it back. Ranchers face the following conditions: falling stock prices, rising taxes, prolonged drought, and a country that's eating less beef. Ranchers want to blame something, and because they're ranchers, they want to fight something. I'd rather it be a wolf than us. So unless Pluie registers to vote.
Pluie was shot and killed by a rancher in British Columbia last month.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm not sure you are.
Just out of curiosity, how much would it cost?
That's the beauty part. With contributions and corporate sponsorship, the cost to the taxpayer is only $900 million.
Seriously, how much would it cost?
CJ, if we're gonna do this, why not do it right?
We're not gonna do it.
Well, sure, there are other things we could spend the money on.
You think?
I'd like to hear what you think. What's a better way to spend this money?
$900 million?
Another warplane? Another SNL bailout?
How about we build the 9 best schools in the world?
Let's move on to the grizzly bear. CJ would like to tell you the story.
Alrighty, so I saw that we may have some West Wing fans on the call. So now we just want to debrief that, right? So this was a legislative meeting that was happening on the show of West Wing, if you're familiar. So what were some pros? What were some positives and pluses of that meeting? How did they do? Feel free to drop in the chat, unmute. What do we think they did well for that meeting? Melissa, thank you. They had their data. Yes. They shared some good information along with a personal story. They used visuals. Yep, another well prepared with visuals. They provided a bottom line cost, right? They were very sure about how much they were asking. They had a solution, right? It was to build a wolves only roadway. Like, feel free to keep dropping those in, but what about the deltas? What are some things? Yeah, thanks, Karen. They evoked emotion. Melissa, they did not describe the benefit to human community or to the agenda, right? They didn't make that connection, totally. Clearly the wrong target. Yes, like if you watch a show, CJ does a lot of the PR, right? And isn't necessarily the person who would be the decision maker in this. They didn't have a response about the opposition, right? They were dismissive of ranchers, right? And clearly CJ was aligned with that, right? They didn't connect with the target. She was making jokes and they just sort of stared blankly. Awesome, Terry. They only offered one option, right? It was clearly a presentation, a well thought out presentation, but there was no discussion or dialogue, right? Any other things? They were aggressive in response. Yep, absolutely. And that goes to what Kezia was saying. There just wasn't a rapport there, right? And this whole session is built on building relationships. And that's because we know that that is just so critical. And so you can't build strong relationships, right, if there isn't that rapport, that trust. Any other? Yeah, Terry, they're not going to be invited back, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so we know that, this is a West Wing legislative meeting, and we can sort of pull it apart. But the reason why we're doing this exercise is because we encourage folks to do this as well with their own meetings, right? To be able to debrief with whatever team that you go into a meeting with and say, what did we do well? What were some challenges? What can we improve as we move forward? And also just think about, the way in which we sort of took this in. These are all lessons that we can apply as we prepare for our own meetings, on our own issues, right? On any issue that we're doing. And these are really helpful things. If we think back to 2 sessions ago when we were talking about, really as you build coalitions and you ground in, the ideas and experiences of impacted communities, it's great as you're prepping folks to think about all of these things, right? And sort of set the stage so folks understand what they're walking into. Awesome. Thank you all so much for all of those. And so just, going through sort of step by step, very often when things are, for me, when things were really chaotic, right? You're running around, you're trying to set up a million meetings, you've done your power analysis, you have a spreadsheet, most likely, you're reaching out to offices. And so sometimes what happened to me was I would see that we didn't have enough time to prepare, right? And so we want to take this time to really talk through what are some strategies when it comes to legislative meetings that we can think about. And this is an opportunity as well. We'll go through what we have, and we would love to hear anything else. I mean, there's no right or wrong answers. Like, we all learn from each experience that we have. So I encourage folks to chime in because we know there are folks from all different states here that may not have thought of things, right? And sometimes we get set in our ways and we think, of course, everyone knows this cool tactic, but they may not. So please feel free to share out. So before the meeting, it's so important to carve out that time to know who's going to be in the meeting and do your research. Know if you are put into a meeting and you are talking to the wrong person, right? And it doesn't mean that that meeting is going to be terrible. That doesn't mean that you should be angry and storm out of the meeting. Just know who it is by asking the simple question, right? Like, oh, who will I be meeting from the office? Or in the intros, make sure that you get the information from that person so you know how to position your message, right? If you're talking to a budget person, that's really different than if you're talking to a legislative person, than if you're talking to the member themselves or to an intern, right? And all of those are different people. And so you just can sort of shape how you communicate with them. If you are new to this, especially given this awesome, collaboration and group that you're all working with, build partnerships with more experienced advocates. If there are folks who have done this a ton, right? Those folks who dropped exclamation points into the chat, take down their names and see if you can, get some advice if you're nervous about it. Create a clear agenda and talking points, right? Everyone who enters that room should be knowing exactly what the takeaway is, right? If we can only say one thing, this is what we want to say. These are the talking points, and then assign roles, right? And so roles, for example, could be the person who facilitates, somebody who takes notes, somebody who takes time, and try to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. I know sometimes it's great when you want to invite a lot of community folks in, and it's, sometimes the member or the person you're meeting with might be like, why aren't these other folks talking, right? And so you want to make sure whoever comes, they're there and they can speak out, even if it's just a little, and that they are fully aware, again, of the agenda and the talking points. Prep members to play roles beyond storytelling. So we want impacted folks to be part of our advocacy. And it's also so critical to include them in this planning process, in the facilitation process, right? Not just to be there to only tell their story, but also to show, their advocacy leadership. And then make sure that the format tool you're using is fully accessible. So this is about, this really refers to this digital age that we're living in. And so if you are doing a campaign with folks who are not as familiar with different digital tools, find one that works, right? And so I know that there were some calls back in 2020 and 2021, when they would have legislative meetings, they would use a phone-based tool because it was a lot easier for their members to chime in and to access. And so getting really clear, making sure folks have the support that they need is important. And then also making sure those roles and everything are clear so that folks aren't tripping over each other, right? Now that we're in the digital world, we can't necessarily look at everyone's eyes and read, you know, if they're ready to talk or not. So really, it's even more important with the digital advocacy. And then strategies during the meeting. Treat them like a person, right? You'll see the theme that we're going for with relationship building. Listen more than you speak. So we, of course, are coming in with an agenda and something that we want to get across. And this, you know, in building relationships, folks love to share what they know, right? And if you can ask them strategic questions that can help you with your campaign. So if we take a step back and we think about your power mapping, maybe you're trying to get to this person, you could say, you know, oh, you know, you're on the health committee. We would love to set up a meeting with the health chair. Would you be able to connect us? Or like, what have you seen are the priorities of the health committee this year, right? What does that look like? And that information could really be super valuable to you as you plan out your strategy. And these points, when we're meeting with our elected officials, very often we just go in and we just sort of like, talk and ask for what we're looking for and share our stories. But it can also be a great time to ask questions and understand where that person is coming from. Again, getting into the relationship give and take. And then, you know, probe for intel. What's the concern, right? If they're not all for it, if you can tell, be like, you know, it seems like you might not be totally on board, you know, what are some questions you might have, or are there other folks that might not be on board? So really, you know, using these different strategies during the meeting can be helpful for your overall strategy. And as you plan and prepare for these meetings, you can identify, like, for this person, the key thing we want to know is that they're going to connect us to this person. For this person, we just want to make sure they understand the campaign, because we saw them speak and they clearly don't know our messaging. And so we want to reiterate that. And then this other person we're going to talk to and ask if they're going to, you know, sign on to the bill. So just have those, you can have different asks from different folks. And then strategies after the meeting. I love this. Some of you were putting that in terms of how you build with electeds, leaving behind your information, setting, you know, next steps. What are you responsible for? What is the elected responsible for, or their office? Setting a date for follow-up, and then writing a thank you note, right? I would say often I encourage folks to bring a one-pager. If they have lots of reports and things, they don't need to bring them, because you can offer them, and then that's a great way for you to continue that relationship and continue to connect. Like, oh, you want the data? We have the data, happy to send it to you as a follow-up, right? And we'll send it to you by next Friday or whatever it is, and just be able to continue that back and forth. And we already mentioned this in terms of digital meetings, right? Some things have shifted, but many of the best practices that we have seen still apply, right? And so it's just a matter of getting comfortable with the different formats and lifting up, you know, and thinking about what is most comfortable for your community members or the folks who are participating in these meetings. And then, you know, making sure that that's accessible to everyone. Other things that folks would add to these strategies before, during, or after meetings that have worked for you all, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat. Oh, Joan, I think you're on mute. We'd love to hear what you're trying to say.
I think one thing that's very important is to be conscious of the time. Legislators are very busy, and they aren't going to listen to you if they think you're going to be very long-winded and not conscious of their schedules at the time. So just plan accordingly.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a good, like, sometimes we would have like off the floor meetings. And so if you're having an off the floor meeting, that's going to be a quick meeting, right? You need to know exactly what you need to say. That's not going to be an ideal situation to talk a lot. Totally. It's great. Thanks, Joan. Sarah Pod, yeah, 3-minute rule, elevator speech, right? Have that. Yeah, it's definitely, and that's something that you can always get with experience, is being able to pivot, right? And being able to shift based on the person that you are talking with. Because sometimes elected officials get in moods where they just want to talk, and like, and they want to talk about anything but what you want to talk about, and you sort of have to rein them in. Lee, yeah, avoid jargon, no acronyms, absolutely. Just as we, if you're in a room and people are throwing out acronyms, it can be uncomfortable to be like, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is, right? And so being cognizant of that an elected official, especially, or their staffers, are never going to say anything. And you're just going to miss out because they're not going to understand anything you're saying. So yeah, really no acronyms or spelling it all out. I know for one campaign I worked on for new elected officials, we made an entire glossary of acronyms that had to do with youth services in New York State. And we just gave it to them, right? And we just said, you probably know all of this, but we just wanted to share this and, just so that everyone would have something on the same page. And that was more of an intro meeting, not during our class. Rita, yeah, don't assume underlying knowledge. Sometimes they haven't done their homework in advance. Ask their level of knowledge on the topic. Don't assume. Yeah, thank you, Rena and Lee. It's so true. And again, many times these folks aren't going to admit that they have no idea what you're talking about. And these are issues that you all have dedicated so much time to understanding. And so it's really important to think about, that they may not know all the nuances. And so figure out ways to communicate them that, isn't condescending or anything, but just, educating them, informing them to make sure that they can take your messaging and support you. Yeah, it is amazing how much sometimes folks don't know a lot, but they also they're being held accountable, right, for everything, right? If you're an elected official, there's so many issues that people are approaching them about. And so that's why we really encourage advocates to make sure that you are like clearly communicating and getting those folks the tools that they need so that they can be effective internally, as they're pushing bills or negotiating. Those are really all great. Thank you so much. Awesome. Thank you. Any other things folks would want to add? This knowledge is gold and you are sharing it with each other. So I encourage you to continue to do it. Are there any questions about any of the other tactics around relationship building that we talked about? This is a very quiet Tuesday group. We're just assuming that it was so crystal clear. So here's just some key takeaways that we want to take. And we're also going to drop our post survey in. We are so appreciative for folks to fill this out. It really helps us assess the content that we're sharing, how helpful it is, and also how we can shift or improve the way we're delivering it. So please take a few minutes there. But the takeaways from today, networking is necessary, right? Relationship building is really necessary. They're the foundation of all of our advocacy. They're so, so important. And develop those customized messages to reach stakeholders. So I know you had a whole session last week, so dig into that about your messaging and framing based on the different stakeholders. Be strategic about when you approach legislators. Also just, what Joan said of keeping in mind their time, right, their capacity for how you're approaching them. Think beyond the Capitol, right, or wherever your legislator meets, and find them where they are. Go to events that they're at, go to things that they care about, not just, those formal meetings, and then bring them to you. So if you're having town halls or you have a briefing on what you're doing, an issue briefing, invite them to your spaces as well so they can meet your community and they can better understand what you're working So awesome. That is it for us. I feel like it was a lot of information. And again, we are going to share out the slides. The video is going to be available, and we'll also share out all of the links that we provided today. If you have not already, please fill out that post survey. And good luck with all of your advocacy. Thank you so much for inviting us all into this space. We really, really appreciate it. And if there's any other way we can support the awesome work that you're all doing, please let us know. Back to you, Kezia.
Thank you so much. I was going to close this out, but I see there's one question in the chat, and I wonder if we have a couple of minutes on the clock, could we take a look at it real quick? It's about the use of written materials. Rena, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. I mean, I've been working on like legislative packets and like how much to include and not to include, and like also just like, with the sort of the informational level, like if you're doing drop-offs versus when you're having a meeting, like do you guys have any sort of rules of thumb about like what should be included in those packets and how much to give and not to give? Like, feels like there's like a tipping point, or like you have to have something as a follow-up so they can review it, but then there's like a point where they're not going to read through everything. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I've seen it done really differently by campaign. For me, I would say the briefer, the better. I think especially now in this digital age, like people are not reading through, legislators definitely read through paper and all of the things, but if you can give the brief overview of your campaign or the key things that they need to know, your ask, where they could lift something up and be like, we know who this, campaign coalition is, and we know what they're asking for. It's pretty explicit. That's the way I would go. But if folks have invested in, writing reports and collecting data, I think it is a great way to share it. I would just say, think about it as a whole sort of, strategy or tactic within your campaign of how you can continue to lift up that data. So if you're going to leave a report, make sure that, every drop off that you left the report, you make a phone call and call them and make sure they got it, right? Or ask them, like, have some next steps for them in terms of like, what do you want them to get out of this report? The goal of the report was obviously not just to like leave it with every elected official. And so how do we get, use that as a tool to engage them more, right? And so I've seen folks where they might have done a whole report about each of the districts in a state or a county or whatever, and then they will do individual one-pagers for each elected, and then be like, oh, do you want to see the full report? Let's have a meeting and I can dig more into this, right? Or if there's additional things. So that's usually my rule of thumb of like, there's no one answer of like, definitely leave all your materials or don't. I would just say, how does it fit into your strategy? As well as the people who are, the messengers. So if somebody can just be really clear with a one-pager, have a meeting, talk through it, but if they had to give a report, they aren't as familiar, then that doesn't really set your campaign up for the best success, right? And so like, think about, do we need to do a briefing of the report with our community members who are leading meetings? Or do we, how do we prepare folks to talk through this stuff? And Corey, do you want to add anything? Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marissa and Corey from the Advocacy Institute. And thank you to all of you for participating today and also in the other advocacy series sessions. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to review these sessions again or share them with others, they will be available this fall as part of our online toolkit for state advocates across the country. So thanks again for your contributions and your participation, and we will be in touch.
Thanks all. Have a good day.